So, my son and I sat at the table one afternoon while I was walking through how to convert fractions to decimals. I walked him through it step by step, the way that I'd been taught. He nodded, he seemed engaged. I thought, okay, we're getting somewhere, which I'm always really excited about because I was never super strong at math. And so when I feel like I'm really able to communicate really well, and I'm getting the point across, I get really excited. But then I asked him to try one on his own, and it was a total blank look, and not the kind of blank look that meant like, oh, he's thinking through it. The kind that means the information I just gave him like evaporated somewhere between my mouth and his pencil. And I do what most of us do. I explained it again, slower, and maybe this is embarrassing to admit, maybe a little louder. And when he still couldn't do it, I started wondering what was wrong with my teaching, or worse, why is he not getting this? But what I didn't know then is that nothing was wrong with either of us. I was just handing him too much at once and not giving his brain a chance to do anything with it. And it wasn't really a willpower problem. It wasn't really a desire problem. It was a working memory problem, and it has a fix. Welcome to Continuing Education, a podcast for homeschooling families with actually useful information. I'm Heidi, and this is the show where we take what actually works in education research and translate it into something you can use at your kitchen table today. This episode, we're talking about a teaching rhythm called chunking with processing time, and I think it's going to change how you structure almost every lesson you teach. So let's start at the beginning. What exactly is chunking with processing time? The short version is it's a teaching rhythm where you break your lesson into small, contained pieces or chunks. Some people might call this bite size. And after each one, you stop and give your learner a chance to do something with what you just taught. So, for example, it's not just sitting there. That pause isn't just like a rest. It's like more of like a mini activity. It's asking your kid to say it back to you or draw a quick picture of it or solve one practice problem that only goes half the way, right? Something that requires them to actively engage with the material before you move on to the next part. The chunking idea isn't new. Cognitive scientists have been talking about working memory limits since the 1950s. There was a psychologist named George Miller who did a lot of the early work on this, actually writing about how the human mind can only hold a handful of distinct pieces of information at once. And that research has only been built upon since then, and it's been refined a lot. But the core idea holds up. We basically don't learn well when we're flooded with information. Our brains need time to process things before we add more. What's evolved more recently is how we think about the processing part, what happens in that pausing moment. Research on retrieval practice, which we've talked about in this podcast series before, and active processing has shown that it's not just enough to pause. The pause is most useful when you're actually pulling the information back out in some form, even briefly or even imperfectly. The way that I typically explain this to parents is imagine your brain is a whiteboard. When I'm teaching, I never stop. I'm just writing and writing and writing. At some point, the whiteboard is full, or worse, I'm writing over things that haven't had a chance to be copied down anywhere permanent. But when I stop and say, okay, tell me the main idea, or draw what I just described, you're kind of taking a photo of the whiteboard. You're moving it from short term to somewhere where that actually sticks in the brain. For homeschooling families, this strategy can be a total gift because you can actually do this in such a very easy, meaningful way. In traditional classrooms or public school classrooms, teachers managing 30 kids, they have a hard time pausing for that individual processing. When you're homeschooling, you're working one-on-one or with a small group, and you have the flexibility to stop mid-lesson to notice when your child's eyes are glazing over and to adjust the size of the chunk on the fly. And that's a huge advantage. The goal is micro chunks, like really small pieces. We're talking 3 to 6 minutes for younger kids or learners who have shorter attention spans, 8 to 12 minutes for older kids who can maybe sustain their focus a little bit longer, kind of just presenting one idea or one clear step, and then a short active pause, and then the next chunk. And that's the basic rhythm. It almost sounds too simple, but the research behind it is why it works and why it's worth knowing, because it's going to help you trust it even when it feels weird to teach in small pieces and much more smaller pieces than you may be used to. So let's talk a little bit. When I was thinking about this idea, I did a little digging into it about why is it working? What's the research behind it? So let me tell you a little bit about it because I think that provides some context before we get into some more of the nitty-gritty practical stuff. The first is working memory. If you spent any time reading about learning differences or neurodivergence, you've probably heard this term, working memory. Working memory is basically your brain's mental scratch pad, the space where you hold and manipulate information in that moment. The problem is it's small and it gets full. There is an educational psychologist. His name is John Sweller. He developed something called cognitive load theory. This was back in the 1980s, and his research had a massive influence on how we think about teaching. The central idea is that every lesson asks the learner to carry a cognitive load, the mental effort required to process information. And when that load exceeds what your working memory can handle, learning totally breaks down. Not because the kid isn't smart or isn't trying or doesn't want to, but because the brain literally cannot hold that much at one time. Sweller's research has been replicated many times and in many contexts, which is promising. I love it when things are replicated because then I feel like I can truly hold on to it. One of the clearest findings in all of these replications and studies is that breaking instruction into smaller segments significantly reduces cognitive overload and improves learning outcomes. Chunking isn't just a workaround for struggling learners. It's better instruction for all, just the end. It's better instruction for all learners. The second piece, there's working memory, but the second piece is retrieval practice. And this comes out of work by cognitive scientists Peter Brown, Henry Roediger, and Mark McDaniel. They wrote a book called Make It Stick. I recommend it. I did find it in my library. So if you want to go a little deeper on the science of learning, it was an interesting book. Their research showed something counterintuitive, that the effort of retrieving information, of actually trying to recall, is actually what's making it stick. Passive rereading or re-listening doesn't do much, but even a small low-stakes recall activity after learning makes a real difference in long-term retention. One of the things that I actually, when I kind of read this, is I presented it to my kiddo. We, for the summer, we're taking June off, but we'll go back to do school year round, so we do it July. But we're taking June off, and I took the boys to the library to pick up some books. My oldest kiddo picked 10 books, and he picked one book on physics. And I was thinking to myself, this kid has never had any interest in this type of topic. Like, he likes science, but more like biology. He's not into like physics and chemistry and that kind of thing. And so I was almost intimidated on his behalf, but I was reading about this research, and we had come across some of the formulas for calculating various, how fast things fall, that kind of thing. And while we were kind of reading, he would come to me with a page and say, "Mom, what does this mean?" We would talk about it briefly, and then I would say, "So what does that mean?" and have him re-explain it to me. And he remembered it much better than if he had just reread it. And I say that because he said, "I've read it through multiple times and I'm not understanding." And so when we kind of talked through it again, and then I had him recall that information, he remembered it really well. Even if one time I was really just reading it on the page because it was a topic that I didn't know a ton about, so I had to like reread it out loud. That concept of just recall really helped him retain some of the information a little bit better and understand to be able to move on. Anyway, back to this research. Here's what's interesting. The researchers put it this way: retrieval practice, recalling facts or concepts or events from memory, is a more effective learning strategy than a review by rereading. And that's from that Make It Stick book. And it's one of those statements that once you take it in, you can't really unknow it. And that little processing pause after each chunk, that's that retrieval practice. That's not wasted time. That's where the actual learning is happening. The third thing that I want to chat about is, this one matters a lot for families with neurodivergent kids, is what happens to attention and regulation when you build in predictable stopping points. There was a 2021 review published in Educational Psychology that looked at how structured lesson formats affect learners with ADHD and related attention differences. And that finding was really interesting. It said that predictability reduces anxiety and cognitive fatigue. So when a child knows that the lesson has a clear rhythm, like chunk, then pause, then chunk, then pause. They're not bracing for this overwhelming block of information. They can kind of settle in and know that the structure itself will become regulating and they will get used to it and then be able to retain it a little bit better because their brain is less stressed and less anxious about what's about to hit them. And this is really important, I think, if you have a kid who resists lessons, or they shut down quickly, or they seem to check out fast. It might not be that they're not able to focus, or they're not able to, think about just what you're presenting. It might be that the format is asking too much of them without enough support built in. And when I read this research, I'll be honest, I thought about all the times that I'd interpreted my own kids' disengagement as some kind of attitude or laziness or disinterest, and I cringe a little. Honestly, I cringe a lot, because if I had understood working memory limits and cognitive load back when we started homeschooling, I would have taught so much more differently. I would have done less talking. I would have done more stopping. I would have done more letting them show me what they understood before I moved on. I think sometimes I almost get excited about talking and I keep going. I would have reined myself in a little bit. None of this is about lowering expectations, though. It's more about structuring your lessons so that their brain can actually meet the expectations that you have. And that's a really big distinction between what this teaching strategy is actually asking you to do. So now let's talk about the actual how to do this. Let's make this more practical. I'm going to walk you through a few examples, and I want these to feel doable, not like you need to redesign your whole school. Some of these we have done, and some of these we have not. They're just ideas that I've gathered that I wanted to share. If it works for you, keep it. If it doesn't work for you, discard it. That's okay. The first thing is plan tiny chunks. So before you sit down for a lesson, ask yourself, what is the one idea or one step I'm teaching right now? Not the 3 ideas, not the whole unit, not the whole chapter, just this chunk. For younger kids, we're talking maybe kindergarten, 2nd grade, or any child who has like a shorter attention window. Aim for 3 to 6 minutes per chunk. For older kids and teenagers, 8 to 12, I think is a good target. That's about how much we do. One concept, one step, one clear takeaway, and then stop. And when I started doing this with my kids, my instinct was I wasn't teaching enough. Like, how can a 6-minute chunk be a real lesson? But what I noticed is that they're actually retaining what I was teaching in 6 minutes, and that was far more productive than 30 minutes of me talking, them nodding, and then totally forgetting. The second thing is signal the routine. So before you start, give a 1-line preview. This really helps with that anxiety that we mentioned before, particularly for kiddos who kind of get overwhelmed with long lessons. So you can say something like, hey, we're going to do 3 chunks today, or name it however you want. You can call it chunks. You can say bite-sized lessons. You can name it whatever you want. But basically, we're going to do 3 chunks today. First, we're going to learn what a metaphor is. Then we'll find some in a poem. Then you'll write one yourself. So now you have the 3 things that you're going to do, and they know, hey, first we learn what a metaphor is, and then you're going to have that retrieval practice. Then we'll find some in a poem, and then you'll have the retrieval practice, and then you're going to write one yourself, we'll review it and have that retrieval practice. And then also let them know, I'll let you know when we move from one to the next. In fact, you could even write it on the board and say, these are the 3 things we're going to do, and cross it out if you have kids that are eager to kind of know when are we going to be done, or maybe they're just overwhelmed. This sounds small, but it's really doing a lot of the work and the anxiety that your kids' brains are probably managing already. It sets the expectation. It reduces the cognitive work of wondering, when will this be over, or what are we even doing? For kids who have anxiety around transitions or need more predictability or structure, this can be a huge game changer for them. The structure becomes something that they can really hold on to, and something that they can build comfort and routine around. The third thing is offer a processing choice after each chunk. So after you finish teaching a mini chunk, instead of immediately moving on, I would recommend giving your kid 2 or 3 options for how to respond to that information, and then let them pick. So for example, you might say, okay, you can say it, which means to explain the main idea back to me in 1 sentence. You can show it, which means you can draw a quick sketch of what you learned, or you can do it, like try 1 practice problem, or maybe a move and tell, maybe walk around the table and talk through while moving. I like to give options because sometimes I'll give one thing and my kiddo just isn't feeling that. I don't care what we do. I just want them to try to retrieve it. I just want them to practice using it. It doesn't matter what we're doing. So it can be something that they enjoy. When you, if you're thinking back to your own, when you became independent in your own learning, when I was in college, I didn't do it the way the professor said to do something or to study. If they gave me advice on how to study, I did it in a way that was meaningful for me, that helped me actually retain the information. And so we're just giving that option to our kiddos as well. They can do things that work for them, and they'll learn about themselves and how they learn as well. The movement one, I think, is legitimately underrated, by the way. If your kid is a pacer, or if they think better when they're not sitting still, it's not behavioral issues. That's information about how their brain processes, and you can let it work for you. So one example that I have in this scenario is when I was younger, I remember learning my times tables, and my mom would have me jump on the trampoline and she would ask me times tables. And that helped me retain the information because I wanted to move. One of my kiddos is a mover. He likes to pace. And so what used to frustrate me when I was younger, when he paced, I thought, oh, he's not paying attention. I quickly learned that's actually just how he processes. And so he paces and he climbs and he moves, and we just kind of roll with the punches. The reason you offer a choice here isn't just to be nice. It's because kids process things differently. You're helping them learn on their own how they learn. Basically, helping them understand themselves and advocate for themselves. And some kids can articulate things verbally. Others need to move or draw to really consolidate what they've learned. Giving them those options really respects that and removes this layer of friction that might otherwise cause them to groan and not want to do the work. The fourth thing is keep processing tasks short. The processing step should take a very short amount of time, like 1 to 3 minutes, a single sentence summary, a small sketch, one practice problem. Don't ask for like a full demonstration of mastery here. You're just asking for a small bit of retrieval, enough to confirm they caught something and enough to help it stick. And here I want to basically name the thing that I used to do that I think was probably not very helpful. I would ask, do you understand? And my kid would say yes, and I'd move on. That's not retrieval practice. That's a comprehension check that even a child who understood nothing will say yes to because they want to please you or because they've learned that yes ends that moment and you move on. Asking them to show you, even briefly, even imperfectly, gives you the real information that what you said landed. And you can praise the effort, not the correctness. So if they answer back with something and it's not correct, instead of saying, no, actually, you could say, hey, I love that you tried, or, oh, that's a really clever way to think of it. And then that goes, a little bit further into the next topic in terms of how to re-explain and re-teach. The fifth thing is build in regulation breaks. So between chunks, not just at the end, but between them, give 30 to 90 seconds for a sensory or movement reset. A good stretch, deep breaths, squeezing of the stress ball, whatever helps your kiddo come back kind of regulated. And this matters a lot because when a child is dysregulated, even mildly, if they're upset in a way, their cognitive capacity will drop. The working memory that's already limited, when that happens, when their cognitive capacity drops, is now competing with the body's stress response. So a short regulation break isn't just wasting time. It will protect the learning that's going to come next. You can actually build that in to kind of decompress. And if your kiddo has kind of regulation tools from maybe occupational therapy or sensory things from neurodivergence, this is a good time to use them. If not, even simple movement, standing up, shaking out their hands, walking to get a drink of water, petting the dog, all of those things can help. The sixth and final thing to do is do a low stakes retrieval later in the day. And this is something that you may underuse. I know that I do because I kind of do, we do school during the day and then we move on with other things, with dinner and cleaning, and we don't kind of spread that out when the lesson is done. So once the lesson is finished, hours later, maybe when you're having snack or during dinner or during a walk, Or if you're driving somewhere, you can ask a casual recall question, and don't make it a quiz, just not like a formal review, just like a gentle prompt. Maybe something like, "What was that thing we learned about this morning?" That delayed retrieval can be really meaningful because it's kind of that spaced practice in a mini moment. And doing it where it's like low risk, that removes the pressure, which is especially important for kids who have anxiety around performance or who are worried about answering wrong or shut down when they feel like they're being tested. And if you can't recall it, if they don't get it, that's totally okay. That's information too. That just gives you data for the next time that you hit your lesson. It tells you that chunk might need to be smaller, or that the processing step needs to be more substantial, or that you should revisit that concept again soon. You totally haven't failed in that moment. It's just data and feedback to allow you to continue evolving as you teach your kiddo. A quick note though, before we move on, about kind of summarizing these things. If your kid freezes when you ask for a processing response, you might consider giving them a more scaffolded choice. The last time we talked about a strategy, we talked about scaffolding. And so this comes along that same concept. Instead of saying like an open-ended, "Hey, say that back to me," or "Explain that to me," offer kind of an A or a B, or one or two. Was the main idea this, or was it this? Or give them a sentence starter. I have one kiddo who really struggles with sentence starters. And so I might say, "Hey, I really want to know what the summary of this was in one sentence. I'm going to start the sentence for you. The main idea was," and then you can let them complete it. Sometimes just getting that start gets their brain kicking and removes some of the anxiety about responding. Over time, you can fade those supports out, but starting with a scaffold is not like this crutch that your kid, shouldn't have to rely on. It's just meeting them where they are, if you have kiddos who struggle with that. If their attention drifts mid-chunk, that might be a sign that your chunk is too long. So maybe you did 10 minutes and your kid is drifting after minute 7. Well, shorten it, go to 5 minutes. Or you can add a physical gesture or movement task inside the chunk, something that kind of breaks up that passive listening. And if there's resistance to timers or the structure itself, let your kid have some ownership. Let them pick the timer. Let them choose which 2 processing options are on the menu. Let them mark off the chunks on a small checklist. A little agency goes a long way in reducing resistance and allows them to learn more about themselves, how they learn, and to advocate for themselves, which I think is huge, not just in homeschool, but beyond. When I first read about chunking and processing, my gut reaction was, one, this seems like a lot of work. But to be honest with you, maybe at the beginning it was more because I was thinking about it. I was just kind of used to how we kind of had done school previously. But then as I kind of was building in intentional pauses or planning mini processing tasks or monitoring chunk length, that took some getting used to, but I noticed pretty quickly that the planning up front actually made the lesson shorter. So rather than just kind of diving into the material and spending an hour on something, if I were more intentional about how it was presented, then that actually takes less time overall because I'm not having to re-explain. I wasn't reteaching things 3 times in essence. I wasn't having kind of that same conversation about why they couldn't remember what we just went over yesterday. The investment on that front end pays off when you kind of take the time to be a little bit more thoughtful about how you approach things, especially for things that they really struggle with. If it's a subject that they love or they really like to be independent and they do well with that, let them go at it. But for things that you're having to teach, because maybe they're struggling with it, or you just want to take on that subject that they're teaching or that you're teaching, it can be really meaningful. The other thing is, it's not a perfect system. It's not going to work the same for every kid or even every day. There are some days that my kids are just not available for learning emotionally, physically, whatever. They're just not feeling it. And no amount of like perfect chunking is going to fix that. If they had like a bad night's sleep or they're just feeling worried about something, I don't want to oversell this as like a magical solution. What it has done for us is that it reduces some of the friction for those subjects that are a little bit more difficult where they were struggling. So, for example, I have one kiddo who just does not, math just doesn't come easily for them. And so when I introduced this into math, it made it go a lot more frictionless, and therefore it made it easier for him to even want to do math. Um, my kiddo knows what to expect because they're not drowning in information. They know that they're going to get a break. They can't, they're not sitting there thinking, I'm going to get a ton of information that I can't even do anything with. We're going to take just a little bite. We're going to practice it, then another little bite, then we're going to practice it. And if I could go back and tell myself one thing at the beginning of our homeschool journey, well, I don't know that I'd limit it to one. I'd probably tell myself a lot. But one of the things I'd probably say is you don't have to cover more to teach more. You don't have to, you don't, in fact, you have to teach less. You have to teach less, but better. Short chunks, real processing, let them show you what they got, and then move on. That can really change a lot in how you're presenting homeschool and how you're framing the schoolwork that you're doing. It can work. If this, take this strategy and give it a try. If it works for you, wonderful. If it doesn't, that's okay too. If you take one thing from today's episode, let it be that your kid's brain isn't broken when information doesn't stick. The lesson just needs a shorter runway and a place to land. Teach one thing, give them a moment to do something with it, then teach the next thing. That's it. That's the whole strategy. Show notes for this episode are at my Substack. You can go to homeschoolce.substack.com. I've also linked the research mentioned today and a few extra resources if you want to go a little deeper on retrieval practice and cognitive load. So if this is something that really speaks to you, go into the research, go into the book. I really appreciate you being here. I'll see you next time. Can't wait to chat more.